The marble floors of the sovereign wing gleamed like ice beneath my knees as I scrubbed, each circular motion sending ripples of cold through my bones. Dawn hadn't fully broken yet, but the palace was already alive with whispers, the kind that slithered through corridors and wrapped around throats like silk scarves pulled too tight. Today was the presentation ceremony, when unmated wolves from every corner of the kingdom would parade before King Daemon Silvercrest, hoping his gaze might linger on them for more than a heartbeat. I wasn't one of them. I was the girl who made their floors shine, who ensured their goblets never sat empty, who existed in the spaces between their laughter and their cruelty. My hair, an unusual shade of pale gold that caught light like winter wheat, was always pinned back severely, hidden beneath a gray cap. Mother used to say it made me look like moonlight trapped in human form. But she'd been gone for 3 years now, taken by the fever that swept through the servants' quarters, while the nobles slept undisturbed in their perfumed chambers. The scent of jasmine and bergamot drifted down from the upper halls, where the candidates were being prepared. I could hear their nervous laughter, the rustle of silk, the sharp commands of the dressmakers. My stomach twisted with something I refused to name. Not envy, exactly, more like the ache of knowing you'll never be invited to taste a feast you've spent hours preparing. Ember. The voice cut through my thoughts like a blade through butter. I looked up to find Cordelia, the head housekeeper, looming over me with her perpetual expression of disappointment. The celestial chamber. Now. And don't track water everywhere. The candidates will be using that corridor within the hour. I scrambled to my feet, wringing out my rag and grabbing my bucket. The celestial chamber was where the king conducted his private audiences, and it was rarely used before noon. My heart hammered against my ribs as I navigated the maze of hallways, passing portraits of former kings whose eyes seemed to follow my movement with ancient judgment. The ring on my finger caught the light from a passing window, and I froze. I'd forgotten to take it off. It was a simple thing, really, a thin band of tarnished silver with a small amber stone that Thomas had given me 3 nights ago, when he'd asked me to marry him. Thomas, who worked in the stables and smelled like hay and honest sweat. Thomas, who looked at me like I was something precious instead of something to be stepped over. I'd said yes because saying no felt like rejecting the only kindness I might ever receive in this life. But wearing it here, in the palace, during the presentation ceremony felt like a small act of rebellion I hadn't meant to commit. I should remove it, hide it in my pocket until my shift ended. But my hands were full, and the celestial chamber doors were already in sight, their gold filigree catching the strengthening morning light. I'd take it off after I finished cleaning. I promised myself. Just a few more minutes wouldn't matter. The chamber was empty when I entered, thank the stars. It was a room designed to intimidate. Vaulted ceilings painted with constellations, windows that stretched from floor to ceiling, and at its center, a massive desk carved from black oak that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. The king's desk. I set to work quickly, polishing the already pristine surfaces, straightening books that didn't need straightening, trying not to think about the fact that King Daemon himself sat here, made decisions that affected thousands of lives, passed judgments that couldn't be appealed. I'd never seen him up close. None of the lower servants had. He was a figure glimpsed from a distance. Tall, dark-haired, moving through the palace like a storm that hadn't yet decided whether to break or dissipate. The rumors about him were countless and contradictory. Some said he was cruel, that he'd killed his own father to take the throne. Others whispered he was haunted, that he paced the halls at night unable to sleep, unable to escape whatever demons followed him from the war that had ended 5 years ago. All I knew for certain was that he'd been searching for his mate for 7 years, ever since he'd come of age, and had found no one. The presentation ceremony had become an annual ritual of disappointment, though no one dared speak it aloud. I was polishing the window behind his desk when I heard the door open. My heart stopped. I turned slowly, praying it was just another servant, maybe even Cordelia come to criticize my technique. It wasn't. King Daemon Silvercrest stood in the doorway, and the air in the room changed, thickened, charged, like the moment before lightning strikes. He was taller than I'd imagined, broader in the shoulders, and his eyes were the color of a forest fire. Amber touched with gold, burning with an intensity that made me want to both flee and step closer. He was staring directly at me. "Your Majesty." I dropped into a curtsy so deep my knees protested, my head bowed, my breath coming in shallow gasps. I apologize. I was told to clean the chamber. I didn't know you'd be. I'll leave immediately. Stay. The single word froze me mid-rise. It wasn't loud, but it carried the weight of absolute authority, the kind that made disobedience feel impossible. I straightened slowly, keeping my eyes down, my hands clasped in front of me, the bucket handle cut into my palm. Good. The pain gave me something to focus on besides the overwhelming presence of the man who now moved into the room with predatory grace. He circled around his desk but didn't sit. Instead, he stood there, studying me with an expression I couldn't read. The silence stretched so long, I began to wonder if I'd been dismissed and simply hadn't heard it. What's your name? His voice was deeper than I'd expected, rough like gravel, but with an underlying current of something else, something that sounded almost like exhaustion. Ember, Your Majesty. My voice came out barely above a whisper. Ember. He repeated it slowly, as if tasting each syllable. How long have you worked in the palace? 3 years, Your Majesty. Since my mother passed. He nodded, and I dared to glance up for just a moment. His face was striking in a way that had nothing to do with conventional handsomeness. It was all sharp angles and shadows, a face that had seen too much and forgotten how to pretend otherwise. There was a scar running along his jaw, pale against his tanned skin, and he was still staring at me. You're not preparing for the ceremony. It wasn't a question, but I answered anyway. No, Your Majesty, I'm not. I'm not of suitable rank to be presented. Something flickered in his eyes. Anger, disdain. But when he spoke, his voice was carefully neutral. Yet you're wearing a ring. The world tilted. I looked down at my hand as if it belonged to someone else, at the thin silver band that suddenly felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds. Heat flooded my face, crawled down my neck. I opened my mouth, but no explanation came out that wouldn't sound like an excuse. I started, then stopped. It's just, someone asked me to... Is he here? The king's voice had dropped lower, taken on an edge that made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. In the palace? He works in the stables, Your Majesty. His name is Thomas. He's a good man, honest and kind, and I... Take it off. The command cut through my rambling like a knife through silk. I stared at him, confused, certain I'd misheard. I'm sorry? The ring. His eyes had gone from flame to inferno, and he took a step closer, close enough that I could smell him. Cedar and smoke and something wild, something that made my wolf stir for the first time in months. Take it off. Now, my hands were shaking as I reached for the ring, and I hated myself for it. What right did he have to command this? What business was it of his if I'd found someone who wanted me, who saw past the servant's uniform, and the too pale hair, and the fact that I'd been born to a mother with no last name, and a father who'd disappeared before I could walk? But he was the king, and I was nothing, and in the end, that was all that mattered. The ring slid off my finger with surprising ease, and I held it in my palm, feeling like I'd just amputated part of myself. The silver looked dull in the morning light, cheap and insignificant, and suddenly I was ashamed of it, ashamed of Thomas's simple proposal, ashamed of my simple acceptance, ashamed of believing for even a moment that I deserved something as ordinary as happiness. Give it to me. I looked up sharply. What? The ring. He extended his hand, palm up, and for a wild moment I considered refusing. But the expression on his face stopped me. It wasn't cruel, wasn't mocking. It was something else entirely, something intense and focused and almost desperate. I placed the ring in his palm, and the moment my skin brushed his, everything changed. The air between us exploded with heat, with recognition, with a pull so strong I actually stumbled forward. His hand closed around mine, his other hand coming up to grip my shoulder, steadying me even as his whole body went rigid. No, he whispered, and it sounded like a prayer and a curse all at once. It can't be, but I felt it too. The bond. The one I'd heard about in stories told by mated wolves, the one I'd convinced myself I'd never experience because girls like me didn't get fairy tale endings. The mate bond. King Daemon Silvercrest was my mate, and from the look of absolute devastation on his face, this was the last thing he'd ever wanted. He released me so abruptly I nearly fell. His hand, the one still holding Thomas's ring, clenched into a fist so tight I heard the metal protest. For a moment, neither of us moved. The celestial chamber felt too small, too bright, the painted constellations on the ceiling spinning in my peripheral vision like they were trying to escape their fixed positions. This isn't possible. His voice had gone hollow, and he turned away from me, striding toward the windows that overlooked the eastern gardens. Morning light carved him into sharp relief. Broad shoulders held with military precision. Dark hair slightly disheveled as if he'd been running his hands through it before entering the room. "You're a servant." The words hung in the air between us like an accusation, not a question, not even really an observation. Just a statement of fact that carried the weight of impossibility. I should have felt insulted, should have felt the same shame that had burned through me moments ago when I'd handed over the ring. But all I felt was a strange, hollow ache in my chest and the overwhelming urge to go to him, to close the distance he'd deliberately created, to touch him again and see if that spark of connection had been real, or just a trick of exhaustion and nerves. "I know what I am, Your Majesty." My voice came out steadier than I expected. "I've never pretended to be anything else." He let out a breath that might have been a laugh if it contained any humor. "The moon goddess has a twisted sense of irony." He turned back to face me, and the expression on his face made my heart constrict. It wasn't anger, though that would have been easier to bear. It was defeat, weariness, the look of a man who'd been carrying something heavy for so long, he'd forgotten what it felt like to stand upright. "Do you know how long I've searched? 7 years. 7 years of ceremonies and presentations and hopeful families parading their daughters before me like livestock at market. I've met nobles from every territory, warriors who could bring down a stag with their bare hands, scholars who speak 6 languages, healers blessed by the old gods themselves." He opened his fist, looked down at the ring resting in his palm like it was something that might bite him. "And my mate is a maid wearing another man's ring." The way he said it, not cruel, just tired, hurt more than outright contempt would have. I wanted to defend myself, to explain that Thomas was kind and the ring was a symbol of the only future I'd thought available to me. But the words died in my throat because what was the point? The bond had already rewritten everything, rendered my plans and promises meaningless before they'd even begun. "I'll leave the palace," I heard myself say. "Today, after the ceremony. We don't have to acknowledge this. No one else felt it. No one else has to know." His head snapped up, and for the first time since the bond had snapped into place, I saw genuine emotion crack through his carefully maintained facade. "You think it's that simple? You think I can just ignore the mate bond because it's inconvenient? I think you're the king, and you can do whatever you want." The bitterness in my voice surprised us both. "That's rather the definition of royalty, isn't it?" Something flickered in his eyes, respect, maybe, or surprise that I'd dared to talk back. He moved toward me again, and this time I forced myself to hold my ground, even though every instinct screamed at me to either run or close the remaining distance between us. "What I want," he said softly, dangerously, "is complicated. What I want has nothing to do with what's possible or practical or politically advantageous." He stopped just close enough that I could feel the heat radiating off him, close enough that my wolf rose to the surface, pressing against my skin like she was trying to break free and claim what was ours. And what I want right now is to know why the moon goddess would give me a mate only to make claiming her an impossibility. "I'm not impossible." The words came out before I could stop them, defensive and raw. "I'm just not what you wanted." His jaw tightened. "You don't understand what you're saying. You don't understand what claiming you would mean, for you, for me, for the entire kingdom. The council would never accept a servant as queen. The noble families would revolt. There are laws, traditions older than either of us, then reject me." The silence that followed was absolute. Even the sounds from the corridor beyond seemed to fade away, leaving only the two of us suspended in this impossible moment. "What?" His voice had gone very quiet. "Reject the bond." I lifted my chin, meeting his gaze even though it felt like staring into the sun. "It's been done before, rare, but not impossible. You reject me formally, the bond weakens. Eventually it fades enough that we can both move on with our lives. You find someone suitable to stand beside you, someone the council will accept, someone who knows how to be a queen. And I swallowed hard. I go back to Thomas, and we leave the capital, and we forget this ever happened. You'd go back to him? Something dangerous crept into his voice. Even now, feeling what you feel, what I feel doesn't matter. And that was the truth, wasn't it? What I felt had never mattered, not in the 23 years I'd been alive. Feelings didn't keep you fed, or sheltered, or safe. Feelings were a luxury for people who had the freedom to indulge them. I learned a long time ago that wanting something doesn't mean you get to have it. He stared at me for a long moment, and I watched the conflict play out across his face. Duty warring with desire, logic battling against instinct. Then he did something I didn't expect. He laughed. It was a harsh, bitter sound, but it was genuine. You're remarkable. Do you know that? He shook his head slowly. You've been my mate for all of 5 minutes, and you're already prepared to walk away to make things easier for everyone else. Most people would be fighting for this, demanding recognition, claiming their rights as the king's destined mate. I'm not most people. No. His gaze softened slightly. You're not. A knock at the door shattered the moment. We both froze, and I saw the shift in him immediately, the walls slamming back into place, the king's mask sliding over the man I'd glimpsed beneath. Enter, he called, his voice once again perfectly controlled. The door opened to reveal Cordelia, whose expression went from professional efficiency to barely concealed shock when she saw me still standing there. Your Majesty, I apologize for the interruption. The council is assembled, and the candidates are ready. The ceremony is scheduled to begin within the hour. Of course. Damon, I couldn't think of him as just the king anymore, not after what we'd shared. Moved behind his desk, the picture of composed authority. Tell them I'll be there shortly. Cordelia's gaze flickered to me, and I saw the calculation in her eyes. She'd sensed something, even if she didn't know what. And the girl, Your Majesty, should she return to her duties? Say yes, I prayed silently. Send me away. Make this easier. No. His voice was calm, final. Ember will remain here for now. We have matters to discuss regarding her future position in the household. My heart stopped. Cordelia's eyes widened fractionally, but she was too well trained to question a direct order. As you wish, Your Majesty. When the door closed behind her, I found my voice. What are you doing? What I should have done the moment I recognized you. He picked up Thomas's ring from where he'd set it on the desk, studied it for a moment, then placed it in a drawer and locked it. The gesture felt significant, final. You're not going anywhere, Ember, not today. Not back to your Thomas, not out of the palace, not out of my sight until we figure out what to do about this. You can't just keep me here like some kind of prisoner. I'm not keeping you prisoner. He moved around the desk again, and this time when he approached, there was purpose in every step. I'm keeping you safe. Do you have any idea what would happen if word got out about the bond before we've had time to manage it properly? The council members who already question my authority would use it against me. The noble families with daughters in today's ceremony would cry foul. And you... His expression darkened. You would become a target for anyone who wanted to hurt me or destabilize the throne. I hadn't thought of that. Hadn't considered that being the king's mate might make me something other than just fortunate. The realization must have shown on my face because his expression softened. You think I'm heartless for not immediately claiming you before the world, he said quietly. But I'm trying to protect you. Both of us. There are forces at work in this palace that you know nothing about, dangers that don't announce themselves with bared teeth and raised claws. Then teach me. The words surprised me as much as they seemed to surprise him. If I'm going to be trapped in this situation, at least give me the knowledge to understand it. A slow smile curved his lips. The first real smile I'd seen from him, and it transformed his entire face. Made him look younger, less burdened. You don't act like any servant I've ever met. Maybe that's because I've never really felt like one. I'd never admitted that before, not even to myself. But standing here, talking to a king like an equal, I realized it was true. I'd scrubbed floors and served meals and bowed my head, but some part of me had always felt separate from that role, like I was playing a part in someone else's story. He studied me with those burning amber eyes, and I felt the bond pulse between us. A living thing, warm and insistent, trying to draw us together despite all the very logical reasons we should stay apart. The ceremony, I said, forcing myself to remember reality. You still have to go through with it. You still have to present yourself to all those women and pretend you're searching for something you've already found." His jaw tightened. "I know." "And afterward? When you don't choose any of them, what then?" "Then the council starts pressuring me to expand the search, to look beyond our borders, to consider political alliances through marriage." He ran a hand through his hair, and I realized he'd probably been fighting this battle for years. The constant pressure to mate, to produce heirs, to secure the succession. They'll never stop. Not until I'm mated to someone they deem acceptable. Or until you reject me and the bond fades enough that you can mate with someone else. He stepped closer. So close I had to tilt my head back to maintain eye contact. "I'm not rejecting you, Your Majesty. Daemon." His hand came up, hovering near my face but not quite touching. "When we're alone, you call me Daemon." "That's not appropriate. Nothing about this situation is appropriate." His thumb brushed across my cheekbone, the barest whisper of contact, and I felt it everywhere, a cascade of sparks that made my breath hitch. "But you're mine, Ember. The moon goddess herself declared it. And I don't care how long it takes or what I have to do to make it work. I'm not letting you go." The conviction in his voice should have frightened me. Should have made me argue. Should have made me insist on the impossibility of what he was suggesting. Instead, for the first time since my mother died, I felt something like hope unfurl in my chest. "What do we do now?" I whispered. His hand fell away, and he stepped back, the king's mask sliding back into place. "Now, you stay in these chambers. There's a reading room through that door." He gestured to a panel I hadn't even noticed, "with comfortable seating and enough books to keep you occupied. Don't leave. Don't speak to anyone. And whatever you do, don't let anyone see you until I return from the ceremony. And then we start planning." His smile was sharp, dangerous, and for the first time I glimpsed the warrior he must have been during the war. "If the council won't accept you as my mate, then we'll have to make them. One way or another." The reading room was nothing like the servants' quarters where I'd spent the last 3 years of my life, where we slept in cramped bunks with thin mattresses and thinner blankets. This space was all velvet cushions and polished wood, floor-to-ceiling bookshelves that smelled of leather and old paper, and something indefinable that I eventually recognized as luxury. A fire burned low in the hearth, even though spring had already arrived. And through the tall windows I could see the palace gardens stretching out in geometric perfection, hedges trimmed into shapes that probably had names I'd never learned, flowers arranged in patterns that spoke of careful planning and unlimited resources. I shouldn't have touched anything, should have sat primly in one of the chairs and waited like an obedient servant for the king to return and tell me what to do next. Instead, I found myself drawn to the shelves, running my fingers along the spines of books I'd only ever heard about in passing. Poetry from the Northern Territories, military strategy texts with gilt lettering, histories of the kingdom that went back centuries, chronicling wars and alliances and the rise and fall of dynasties that had all led somehow to this moment. Me, standing in the king's private sanctuary, wearing a maid's uniform and trying to comprehend how my entire life had been rewritten in the span of a single conversation. I pulled down a volume at random, a collection of old legends about the moon goddess and her gifts to the wolf clans. The pages were worn soft with age, and someone had made notes in the margins in handwriting that was surprisingly elegant. His handwriting, I realized. Daemon's. The thought sent an unwelcome flutter through my stomach. I was curled up in one of the armchairs, deep in a story about the first mate bond ever formed, when I heard the roar. It came from somewhere distant, muffled by stone and distance, but unmistakable. The sound of hundreds of voices raised in shock or excitement or both. The ceremony had begun. Right now, Daemon was standing before the assembled crowd, before all those carefully groomed candidates in their silk gowns, and he was pretending to search for something he'd already found in the most inconvenient place possible. I closed the book and set it aside, my hands suddenly restless. Through the windows, I could see servants moving through the gardens below, carrying trays of refreshments for the guests who would spill out after the ceremony, to gossip and commiserate and celebrate or mourn, depending on the outcome. I recognized some of them, Clara from the kitchen, who always saved me the end pieces of bread because she knew I liked them crispy. Old Marcus, who tended the rose garden, and had shown me which blooms to cut for the dinner arrangements. People I'd worked alongside, laughed with, complained about sore feet, and demanding nobles with. People who had no idea that one of their own was hiding in the king's chambers, tied to him by a bond that could change everything, or destroy us both. The door to the main chamber opened without warning, and I jumped to my feet, my heart hammering. But it wasn't Damon who entered. It was a man I'd never seen before. Tall and lean with silver threading through his dark hair, wearing the formal robes that marked him as a council member. His eyes, when they found me through the open doorway of the reading room, were cold and calculating. "Well," he said, his voice smooth as silk and twice as dangerous, "this is unexpected." I froze, every instinct screaming at me to run. But there was nowhere to go. The reading room had only one exit, and he was blocking it. "I'm just cleaning, sir." The lie came automatically, years of subservience making the words flow easily. His Majesty asked me to. "Don't insult my intelligence, girl." He moved into the room with the kind of confidence that came from decades of power, his gaze sweeping over me with an intensity that made my skin crawl. "I can smell it on you. The bond." His lips curved into something that might have been a smile on someone else, but looked predatory on him. "How long?" My mind raced. Deny it? He'd already said he could sense it. Run. He'd catch me before I reached the door. Scream? Who would hear? And who would believe me over a council member? "This morning," I said finally, lifting my chin in a show of courage I didn't feel. "Just before the ceremony." He clasped his hands behind his back, still studying me like I was a particularly interesting insect he'd found under a rock. "And I suppose our dear king has stashed you here while he goes through the farce of pretending to search for what he's already found. How deliciously inconvenient for him." "Who are you?" "Lord Garrett Ashford, senior council member, advisor to the crown, and currently the only thing standing between you and a very complicated future." He moved closer, and I forced myself not to back away. "Tell me, does the king plan to announce you, present you to the council, or is he hoping to keep this quiet until he can figure out how to manage the scandal?" "I don't know what he plans. That, at least, was the truth." "No, I don't suppose you would. You're just the poor servant girl who got caught up in forces beyond her understanding." His tone was almost sympathetic, which somehow made it worse. "Do you have any idea what you've walked into? The king has enemies, child. Powerful ones. Nobles who think his father's death was too convenient, territories that still resist his authority, council members who believe he's too young and too damaged by war to rule effectively. Then maybe you should be having this conversation with him, not me." The words were out before I could stop them, and I immediately regretted my boldness, but Lord Ashford surprised me by laughing. A genuine sound that didn't match the coldness in his eyes. "Oh, you have spirit. I'll give you that." He circled around me slowly, and I turned to keep him in sight. "But spirit won't protect you from what's coming. The moment word gets out about this bond, and it will get out, these things always do, you'll become the most valuable piece on a very dangerous game board. Some will try to use you to control the king. Others will try to eliminate you to clear the path for their own candidates. And a few," he paused, his expression thoughtful, "a few might see an opportunity in you." "What kind of opportunity? The kind where a clever girl from nowhere becomes queen and remembers who helped her get there." He stopped directly in front of me, so close I could smell the wine on his breath. "I could be that help, Ember. I could teach you how to navigate court politics, how to win over the council, how to transform yourself from a servant into someone worthy of standing beside the king. Why would you do that?" "Because I'm a pragmatist," he shrugged eloquently. "The bond exists. Fighting it would be futile and potentially destabilizing for the kingdom. Better to accept reality and position myself accordingly. If you're going to be queen, and let's be honest, with a mate bond in play, that's the most likely outcome, then I'd prefer to be on your side when it happens." I wanted to believe him. Wanted to think that someone in this palace full of secrets and schemes might actually be offering genuine help. But something in his smile, something in the way his gaze kept drifting to the door, as if he expected Damon to return any moment, set off every warning bell I'd learned to trust during 3 years of being invisible and overlooked. "I'll think about your offer," I said carefully. "Don't think too long. The ceremony will end soon, and once it does, events will start moving very quickly." He moved toward the door, then paused. One more thing. That ring you were wearing, the one from the stable boy, you'll want to sever that connection completely. Send him away, pay him off, do whatever you must, but make it clean. The king is possessive by nature, and mate bonds only amplify that tendency. If he perceives any threat to his claim on you. He left the thought unfinished, but the implication was clear enough. When he was gone, I sank back into the chair, my legs suddenly unsteady. The book I'd been reading lay forgotten on the side table, and I stared at it without really seeing it, my mind churning through everything Lord Ashford had said. He was right about Thomas. I couldn't just disappear without explanation. Couldn't leave him wondering what had happened or why I'd suddenly vanished. He deserved better than that. Deserved the truth, even if the truth would hurt us both. The thought of facing him, of seeing the hope in his eyes die when I explained that I could never marry him now, made my chest ache with a grief that felt disproportionate to the brief time we'd been engaged. But it wasn't really about Thomas, was it? It was about losing the simple future I'd imagined. The cottage outside the capital, the garden I'd plant, the ordinary life where my biggest concerns were whether the chickens were laying and if we'd saved enough for winter supplies. That future was gone now, burned away by a bond I'd never asked for with a man who wore a crown and carried the weight of a kingdom on his shoulders. The sun had moved significantly across the sky when the door finally opened again. This time it was Damon, and one look at his face told me everything I needed to know about how the ceremony had gone. No one. He closed the door behind him with carefully controlled force and leaned against it, his eyes closed. 300 candidates from every corner of the kingdom, and not a single bond stirred. The council is furious. The noble families are demanding explanations. And I had to stand there for 4 hours smiling and pretending I was disappointed instead of relieved. I stood, unsure whether to go to him or maintain the distance. Lord Ashford was here. His eyes snapped open. What? About an hour after you left, he came into the chambers, found me in the reading room. He knew about the bond. I watched his expression darken with every word. He said he could smell it, that it was obvious. He offered to help me, said he could teach me how to be queen, how to win over the council. That manipulative bastard. Damon pushed off from the door, pacing to the windows and back. Of course he did. Garrett Ashford never makes a move without calculating every possible advantage. If he's offering to help you, it's because he thinks he can use you somehow. He said I'd become valuable, that people would try to use me to control you or eliminate me to clear the path for other candidates. He's not wrong. Damon scrubbed a hand over his face, and for the first time I saw how exhausted he looked. Lines of strain around his eyes, tension in his shoulders that spoke of hours spent holding himself rigid and controlled. This is exactly what I was afraid of. Once word spreads, and it will, Garrett will make sure of it. We'll have very limited time to establish your position before someone makes a move. What kind of move? He looked at me then, really looked at me, and something in his expression made my breath catch. The kind that could get you killed. The words hung in the air between us, stark and terrifying. I'd understood on some level that this situation was dangerous, but hearing him say it so baldly made it real in a way it hadn't been before. Then reject me. My voice came out steadier than I felt. Do it now, before anyone else finds out. Make a formal rejection, let the bond fade. Find someone the council will accept. I'll leave the palace tonight, go somewhere far away where— He was across the room before I could finish, his hands gripping my shoulders, his face inches from mine. Stop. Saying that. Each word was bitten off, sharp with an emotion I couldn't quite name. I told you this morning, I'm not rejecting you. I'm not letting you go. I don't care if it's inconvenient or dangerous or politically catastrophic. You're mine, and I protect what's mine. Even if protecting me puts you at risk, puts the whole kingdom at risk, especially then. His grip softened, his thumbs stroking small circles on my shoulders through the rough fabric of my uniform. Do you know what I've been doing for the last 7 years? Searching for you. Every ceremony, every presentation, every introduction to another perfectly suitable noble daughter. I was searching. Not because I wanted a wife or needed an heir, but because I could feel this absence, this hole where something essential should be. And today, when I walked into this chamber and saw you standing there with sunlight in your hair and fear in your eyes, everything clicked into place. Everything made sense for the first time since the war ended. His words wrapped around me like a warm cloak, and I felt the bond pulse in response, that invisible thread connecting us growing stronger with every moment we spent together, every honest word exchanged. "I don't know how to be what you need," I whispered. "I don't know how to be a queen, how to navigate politics or win over councils or any of the things Lord Ashford was talking about. I'm just a maid, Damon. I clean floors. I serve meals. I'm nobody." "You're not nobody." He released one of my shoulders to cup my face, tilting it up so I had to meet his eyes. "You're the woman who was prepared to walk away to make things easier for everyone else. You're the woman who looked a king in the eye and told him to reject you, rather than let him be trapped in an inconvenient bond. You're the woman who spent 3 years invisible in this palace and still managed to keep that fire in your eyes." His smile was soft, genuine. "Trust me, Ember. You're exactly what I need. You just don't know it yet." Before I could respond, before I could process the emotions threatening to overwhelm me, he stepped back and straightened his jacket, the king's mask sliding back into place. "We need to move quickly. Tomorrow morning I'm calling an emergency council session. I'm going to announce the bond and declare my intention to make you my queen." My heart stopped. Tomorrow? That's too soon. It has to be soon. Before Garrett and his allies have time to mount a coordinated opposition. Before rumors spread and get distorted. We control the narrative by being first. He moved to his desk, pulling out parchment and ink. "Tonight you're moving to the guest wing, the suite reserved for royal visitors. I'm assigning you a personal guard and a lady's maid. From this moment forward, you're under my protection, as my acknowledged mate." "What about Thomas?" The question made him pause, his jaw tightening. "What about him?" "I need to speak with him. Explain what happened. Release him from the engagement properly. He deserves that much." For a moment, I thought he might refuse. The possessive gleam in his eyes suggested his wolf was not at all pleased with the idea of me having any contact with the man who'd claimed me first, bond or no bond. But then he nodded slowly. "Tomorrow afternoon, after the council session, you can meet with him in the gardens, with your guard present. You'll tell him the engagement is over, return whatever he gave you, and make it clear that any further contact would be unwelcome. Can you do that? It would hurt. Would feel like severing the last thread connecting me to the simpler life I'd imagined. But it was necessary, and more importantly, it was right." "Yes," I said, "I can do that." "Good." He returned to his writing, his hand moving swiftly across the parchment. "There's one more thing. The council session tomorrow, it's going to be brutal. They'll question your fitness, your bloodline, your suitability to stand beside me. They'll say things designed to make you doubt yourself, to make you seem small and worthless and beneath the dignity of the crown." He looked up, and the intensity in his gaze pinned me in place. "Don't let them. Don't shrink or apologize or try to make yourself smaller to fit their expectations. You stand there beside me as my equal, my mate, my future queen. And if they can't accept that," his smile turned sharp, dangerous, "then they're welcome to challenge me directly. I haven't had a good fight in years." The guest suite was 3 times the size of the servants' quarters dormitory where I'd slept for the past 3 years. The bed alone could have fit 5 people comfortably, draped in silk the color of midnight with pillows that looked like clouds. A fire roared in the marble hearth, and through the arched windows I could see the palace lights beginning to flicker on as dusk settled over the grounds like a velvet blanket. I stood in the center of it all, still wearing my maid's uniform, feeling like an imposter in a story that belonged to someone else. The lady's maid Damon had assigned to me, a woman named Helena with kind eyes and graying hair pulled back in an elegant knot, was currently directing 2 younger servants as they filled an enormous copper bathtub with steaming water. The scent of lavender and honey filled the air, so different from the harsh soap we used in the servants' quarters that it made my throat tight. "Your Highness," Helena said, approaching me with a gentle smile. "The bath is ready. May I help you undress? I'm not—" I stopped myself. "Not a highness. Not yet. Maybe never, if the council had their way tomorrow. But arguing about titles wouldn't change what was happening, wouldn't make this any less surreal. I can manage myself, thank you." Her expression softened with understanding. "Of course. I'll be just outside if you need anything." His Majesty has requested that you dine in your chambers tonight. He thought you might prefer privacy to facing the dining hall. Privacy. That was one word for it. Another would be hiding, keeping me sequestered away from prying eyes and wagging tongues until he'd had a chance to control the narrative. I should have felt grateful. Instead, I felt like a secret, something to be managed and revealed at the proper moment. But I nodded and thanked her, because what else could I do? When I was alone, I peeled off the gray uniform I'd worn for 3 years, the one that had marked me as invisible, as beneath notice, as someone who existed only to serve. It felt symbolic, shedding that skin, but the woman revealed beneath was still just me. Still Ember, with pale hair that never quite stayed pinned properly, and hands roughened from work, and a body that was too thin from years of making sure there was always enough food for others before taking my own share. The bathwater was almost too hot, but I sank into it anyway, letting it burn away the tension and fear and overwhelming uncertainty of the day. I stayed there until the water cooled and my fingers pruned, trying to wrap my mind around the fact that tomorrow, everything would change. Tomorrow, Daemon would stand before his council and declare me his mate, and either they would accept it or they wouldn't. And I had no control over which outcome would unfold. Helena returned as I was drying off, carrying an armful of fabric that shimmered in the firelight. His Majesty sent these for you, she said, laying out a nightgown of cream silk so fine it was nearly transparent, and a robe of deep blue velvet lined with fur. And these are for tomorrow. She revealed a gown that made my breath catch, midnight blue like the bedding, with silver embroidery that caught the light like stars. It was beautiful, elegant, exactly the kind of thing a queen might wear. Exactly the kind of thing I had no business touching, let alone putting on my body. I can't wear that, I whispered. You can, and you will. Helena's voice was firm, but not unkind. Tomorrow, you stand before the council as the king's acknowledged mate. You need to look the part, my dear. Let them see you as he sees you. Not as a servant, but as someone worthy of standing beside him. I wanted to argue. Wanted to say that clothes didn't change what I was, that silk and embroidery couldn't transform a maid into a queen. But Helena was already moving around the room, laying out jewelry, sapphires that probably cost more than I'd earn in a lifetime, and soft leather slippers that looked like they'd been made for someone with much more delicate feet than mine. Get some rest, she said, heading toward the door. Tomorrow will be difficult, but you're stronger than you think. I can see it in you, the same strength your mother had. I spun around. You knew my mother? Helena paused, her hand on the door handle, and smiled sadly. Catherine was my sister, your aunt, though we never got to claim each other publicly. She worked in the kitchens, I worked in the royal wing, and servants aren't supposed to show favoritism to family. Her eyes glistened. I wanted to help you after she passed. Wanted to bring you under my wing, but the head housekeeper at the time wouldn't allow it. Said you needed to earn your place like everyone else. I've been watching over you as best I could, though, making sure you got enough to eat, that you weren't given the worst assignments. The revelation hit me like a physical blow. All this time, I'd thought I was alone in the world. Had believed that when my mother died, any connection to family had died with her. Why didn't you tell me? Because knowing would have made things harder for both of us. She crossed back to me, taking my hands in hers. But now things are different. Now you're going to need family who understands how the palace works, who knows which council members can be reasoned with, and which ones will never accept you no matter what you do. Let me help you, Ember. Let me be what I should have been 3 years ago. I pulled her into a hug, this woman who was a stranger and an aunt all at once, and for the first time since the bond had snapped into place that morning. I felt like maybe I wasn't completely adrift. Sleep came in fits and starts, punctuated by dreams of standing before a crowd of hostile faces, of trying to speak but finding no words would come, of reaching for Daemon only to have him disappear like smoke. I woke before dawn with my heart racing and the sheets tangled around my legs, and lay there watching the sky lighten beyond the windows until Helena knocked softly and entered with breakfast. The morning passed in a blur of preparation. Helena helped me into the midnight gown, and I barely recognized the woman staring back at me from the mirror. Elegant, composed, with my pale hair arranged in an intricate style that made it look intentional rather than unkempt. The sapphires at my throat caught the light with every breath, and the gown fit perfectly, despite having no measurements taken, hugging my waist before flowing to the floor in elegant lines. "His Majesty has an excellent eye," Helena murmured, adjusting a final pin. "He described you perfectly when he ordered this made. When did he have time to order a gown?" "Last night, after he settled you here. Woke the royal seamstress from sleep and paid her triple to have it ready by morning." She smiled at my expression. "He's determined. I'll give him that. When King Daemon sets his mind to something, heaven and earth move to accommodate him." A knock at the door announced my guard, a tall woman named Sasha, with battle scars on her hands and an expression that suggested she'd seen too much to be impressed by anything. "Your Highness," she said with a respectful nod, "His Majesty requests your presence in the council chambers. Are you ready?" No. I wasn't ready. Would never be ready to face a room full of powerful people who would look at me and see only an inconvenience, an obstacle to their carefully laid plans. But I nodded anyway, and followed her into the corridor. The council chambers were in the oldest part of the palace, all stone walls and vaulted ceilings that had witnessed centuries of decisions that shaped the kingdom. Guards flanked the massive oak doors, and I could hear voices from within, raised in argument, sharp with disagreement. Sasha pushed open the doors, and conversation stopped instantly. The chamber was circular, with tiered seating arranged around a central floor where Daemon stood waiting. He was dressed in formal black with silver threading, the crown of the kingdom resting on his dark hair, and when his eyes found mine across the distance, something in my chest settled, calmed. The bond hummed between us, steady and sure, reminding me that whatever happened next, I wasn't facing it alone. I walked down the steps with my head high, feeling every gaze tracking my movement. The council members, 20 in total, ranging from ancient men who looked like they'd been carved from stone to younger nobles barely older than myself, watched with expressions that ranged from curiosity to outright hostility. Lord Ashford sat in the front row, and when our eyes met, he inclined his head slightly, a reminder of his offer, perhaps, or just acknowledgement that the game had officially begun. Daemon extended his hand as I reached the floor, and I took it, feeling the spark of contact even through our gloves. He pulled me close, positioning me slightly in front of him. A clear statement of protection and possession. "Counselors," he began, his voice carrying easily through the chamber. "I've called this emergency session to make an announcement that will affect the future of our kingdom. Yesterday morning, the mate bond activated between myself and this woman, Ember Catherine's daughter. As of this moment, I formally recognize her as my destined mate and future queen." The explosion of reaction was immediate. Shouts of protest, gasps of shock, voices raised in argument and disbelief. One council member, a portly man with a face like a bulldog, surged to his feet. "This is outrageous. She's a servant, a nobody with no bloodline, no education, no preparation for the role of queen. The moon goddess doesn't consult bloodlines when forming bonds, Lord Brennan." Daemon's voice cut through the chaos like a blade. "She chooses based on souls, on compatibility, on what each of us needs to become whole. Would you question her wisdom? I question the wisdom of elevating a maid to the highest position in the kingdom." Another voice, this one belonging to a sharp-faced woman in burgundy silk. "What message does this send? That anyone can aspire to the throne? That centuries of tradition and careful breeding mean nothing? It sends the message that merit and destiny matter more than accident of birth." Daemon's hand tightened on mine. "Ember has lived and worked in this palace for 3 years. She knows its rhythms, its people, its needs in ways most of you never will. She understands the struggles of those you claim to serve because she's lived them. She's uneducated," Lord Brennan again, his face reddening. "Can she even read? Does she know the first thing about governance, about diplomacy, about maintaining alliances?" "She can read." I found my voice before Daemon could respond, and felt him go still beside me. 6 languages, actually. My mother taught me before she died. She believed education was the one thing no one could take from us. I met Lord Brennan's gaze steadily. "As for governance and diplomacy, I've spent 3 years observing how this palace operates. I've seen which policies work and which ones cause suffering. I've listened to servants discuss the tax burden, heard soldiers complain about inadequate supplies, watched kitchen staff stretch meager budgets to feed nobles who waste more food in a single meal than most families see in a month. The chamber had gone silent. "You want to know if I'm qualified to be queen?" I took a step forward, away from Daemon's protective stance. "I don't know. But I know that for 3 years, I've watched this palace from the bottom up. I've seen the cracks you're all too elevated to notice, and maybe that's exactly the perspective this kingdom needs. Someone who remembers what it's like to be cold, to be hungry, to be invisible, and overlooked. Someone who won't forget that every decision made in this chamber affects real people with real lives, not just numbers in a ledger or pieces on a game board." Lord Ashford was smiling slightly, and I couldn't tell if that was a good sign or a terrible one. "Bold words," the sharp-faced woman said, "but words are easy. Actions are what matter. What happens when you're faced with real challenges? When you have to choose between the needs of the common people and the stability of the kingdom? When foreign dignitaries insult you to your face because they see you as beneath them? Then I'll deal with it." I kept my voice steady, even though my heart was racing, the same way I've dealt with every challenge in my life, by refusing to give up, by finding solutions instead of making excuses, by remembering that I'm stronger than people assume. I paused. And by having a mate who chose me despite every logical reason not to. If the king believes I can do this, then maybe the rest of you should consider that he might see something you're too busy protecting your prejudices to notice. Daemon's hand found my waist, a gesture of support and solidarity that didn't go unnoticed by the council. "I'm not asking for your blessing," he said quietly. "I'm informing you of a decision that's already been made. Ember is my mate. She will be my queen. The only question is whether you'll support the transition gracefully, or whether we'll have to do this the hard way." "And what exactly is the hard way, Your Majesty?" Lord Ashford spoke for the first time, his tone carefully neutral. "The way where I remind everyone in this chamber that I won the throne through combat when my father proved unworthy of it." Daemon's voice went cold. "The way where I make it very clear that any threat to my mate is a threat to me personally, and I'm still quite skilled at eliminating threats. The way where we find out which council members value tradition more than their lives." The silence that followed was absolute. Finally, Lord Ashford stood. "I move that we accept the king's mate bond as valid and begin preparations for a coronation ceremony. All those in favor?" He raised his hand. Slowly, hesitantly, others followed. Not all of them. Lord Brennan and the sharp-faced woman and several others kept their hands down, their faces set in stubborn disapproval. But it was enough, barely, but enough. "Motion carries," Lord Ashford announced. "Welcome to the council, Your Highness. I look forward to seeing how you handle the challenges ahead." The way he said it made it sound less like a welcome and more like a warning. As the session dissolved into smaller conversations and strategic regrouping, Daemon pulled me toward a side exit. His face was carefully composed, but I could feel the tension radiating off him. "That was dangerous," he said once we were alone in the corridor. "Challenging them like that, speaking out of turn. You said not to shrink, not to make myself smaller." I turned to face him. Was I supposed to stand there silently while they debated my worth like I wasn't even in the room? His expression softened. "No. You were perfect. Terrifying and perfect, and exactly what they needed to see." He cupped my face in both hands. "But now they know you're a threat, not just to their traditions, but to their comfortable assumptions about how power works in this kingdom. They'll come after you, Ember, in ways you can't anticipate. Then you'll teach me to anticipate them." I covered his hands with mine. "That's what you promised, remember? To help me become what I need to be." "What you need to be," he said softly, "is exactly what you already are. Everything else is just window dressing." He pressed his forehead to mine, and I felt the bond pulse between us. Stronger now, more solid, like a bridge that had finished building itself stone by stone. "But yes, I'll teach you everything I know. Starting with how to survive the coronation without someone trying to poison your wine." I pulled back. "That's not a real concern, is it?" His expression told me everything I needed to know. "Right," I said faintly. "Poison. Of course, why wouldn't there be poison?" He smiled despite the gravity of the situation. "Welcome to royalty, my queen. It's exactly as glamorous as you imagined." The gardens were empty when I arrived that afternoon, the spring flowers nodding in a breeze that carried the scent of fresh earth and possibility. Sasha stood at a discreet distance, close enough to intervene if needed, but far enough to give the illusion of privacy. My hands were trembling as I waited, the midnight gown replaced with something simpler. A day dress in pale gray that Helena had assured me was appropriate for difficult conversations. I heard Thomas before I saw him. The familiar stride, the slight shuffle he'd developed after a horse kicked him last winter. When he rounded the hedge, his face lit up with relief that made my chest ache. Ember. Thank the gods. He crossed the distance quickly, reaching for my hands. I heard the strangest rumors. Someone said you'd been moved to the guest wing, that the king himself had ordered guards to watch over you. I tried to find you this morning, but they wouldn't let me past the servants' quarters. What's going on? Are you in trouble? I gently extracted my hands from his grip. Thomas, sit with me? Something in my tone made his smile falter. We settled on a stone bench beneath a flowering cherry tree, its petals drifting down around us like pink snow. For a moment, I couldn't find the words. Couldn't figure out how to explain something that still felt unreal to me. The ring you gave me, I started finally. Do you remember when I said yes, what I told you? You said you'd be honored to be my wife. His voice had gone cautious, wary. You said you wanted a simple life, away from the palace, somewhere we could be happy. I did want that. I meant it when I said it. I forced myself to meet his eyes. Kind, honest Thomas, who'd never asked me to be anything other than what I was. But something happened yesterday, something I couldn't have predicted or prevented, something that changes everything. What could possibly change everything in a single day? A mate bond. The words hung between us like a sword suspended by a thread. I watched understanding dawn across his face. First confusion, then disbelief, then a painful acceptance that made me want to look away, but I forced myself to hold his gaze. He deserved that much. The king. He said flatly. You're bonded to the king. Yes. He stood abruptly, pacing a few steps away before turning back. How? When? You were wearing my ring yesterday morning. We had plans. I know. I went to clean the celestial chamber before the ceremony, and he was there, and the bond just activated. Neither of us expected it. Neither of us wanted it. At least not at first. I stood as well, needing him to understand. Thomas. If there had been any other way, but there isn't. He laughed. But it was a broken sound. Of course there isn't. You can't fight a mate bond, can't ignore it or wish it away, or choose someone else over it, no matter how much you might want to. He scrubbed a hand over his face. Does he treat you well? The king? The question surprised me. He's protective, determined. He stood before the council this morning and declared me his mate, despite knowing it would cause chaos. He's willing to fight for this, for me, even when the logical thing would be to reject you and find someone suitable. Thomas finished the sentence. I couldn't. But he won't. Because that's what the mate bond does. It makes you irrational, makes you willing to risk everything for someone you barely know. He met my eyes again. Do you love him? I don't know him well enough to love him yet. I answered honestly. But I feel the bond, Thomas. I feel it pulling me toward him, making me want to be near him, making me care about his well-being in ways that don't make logical sense. And I think I could love him, given time. I think maybe I'm supposed to. He nodded slowly, accepting what I knew must be devastating to hear. Then I release you. From the engagement, from any promises you made, from any obligation you feel toward me. He pulled something from his pocket, my ring, the one Damon had locked away. The king had this delivered to me this morning, along with a letter explaining the situation and a rather generous sum of money. Enough to buy a small farm outside the capital, he said. A fresh start. Thomas. He's taking care of me because I matter to you. He pressed the ring into my palm, closing my fingers around it. That's more consideration than I expected from royalty, more than most would give a stable hand who got in the way of a mate bond. He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. Be happy, Ember. Be the queen I know you can be. And if he ever mistreats you, ever makes you regret this, you send word and I'll storm the palace myself. Bond or no bond. I pulled him into a hug, this good man who'd offered me kindness when I'd had so little of it, and felt him hold on just a moment too long before releasing me. When he walked away through the garden paths, I didn't watch him go. It felt like a betrayal somehow, to witness his leaving when I was the one who'd chosen to stay. That was harder than I expected, I said quietly, knowing Sasha could hear me. The right choices often are, Your Highness. She stepped closer, her expression sympathetic. But you handled it with grace. He'll remember that, when the hurt fades. The coronation preparations consumed the next 2 weeks like a wildfire consuming dry timber. Helena became my constant companion, teaching me protocols I'd never imagined existed. How to hold a scepter, how to walk with a crown's weight distributed properly, which fork to use for which course at state dinners. Lord Ashford appeared regularly with political tutors who drilled me on the names and histories of noble families, territorial disputes, trade agreements, and the delicate balance of power that kept the kingdom stable. Damon stole moments with me when he could, appearing in my chambers late at night after council sessions that ran long, or pulling me into alcoves between lessons to kiss me breathless and remind me why we were fighting so hard for this future. The bond grew stronger with each passing day, until I could feel his emotions like echoes of my own, the stress he tried to hide, the fierce protectiveness that colored every decision he made, the slowly building hope that maybe, just maybe, this could actually work. But not everyone was pleased with the rapid preparations. Lord Brennan and his faction made their disapproval known at every opportunity, raising procedural objections and demanding additional waiting periods to ensure the kingdom was ready for such a dramatic change. 3 times, servants assigned to me mysteriously fell ill and had to be replaced. Twice, food meant for my table was discovered to contain herbs that would have made me violently sick. Not lethal, but enough to embarrass me before foreign dignitaries who'd been invited to witness the coronation. They're testing you, Lord Ashford explained over tea one afternoon, his expression grave, seeing if you'll break under pressure, if you'll prove too weak to handle the position. Every incident you survive makes their position weaker and yours stronger. How encouraging, I muttered, pushing away a plate of pastries I no longer trusted. He smiled slightly. You're doing better than anyone expected, myself included. The tutors report you're a quick study. The servants who've gotten to know you speak highly of your character. Even some of the council members who initially opposed you are starting to come around. He paused. Though I'd recommend you avoid Lord Brennan's wing of the palace entirely. He's made it clear he'll never accept you, and he has influence with the older noble families. I'd already learned that lesson the hard way when I'd encountered him in a corridor 3 days prior. The things he'd said, the names he'd called me, had made Sasha reach for her weapon before I'd stopped her. Some battles, I was learning, couldn't be won through confrontation. The night before the coronation, I stood in my chambers staring at the gown that had been created for the ceremony. White silk embroidered with silver thread in patterns that represented the kingdom's history, with a train so long it would require 3 attendants to manage it. It was beautiful and terrifying, and so far removed from anything I'd ever imagined wearing that I felt dizzy just looking at it. A knock at the door announced Damon, and I turned to find him watching me with an expression I couldn't quite read. Having second thoughts? He asked quietly, closing the door behind him. 3rd and 4th thoughts, if I'm being honest. I gestured at the gown. Tomorrow I put that on and walk into the Grand Cathedral and let them place a crown on my head. And suddenly I'm responsible for thousands of lives. What if I'm not ready? What if they're right, and I'm not qualified for this? He crossed to me, taking my hands in his. Do you know what I did the night before I challenged my father for the throne? I sat in my chambers and made a list of all the ways I was unqualified to rule. I was too young, too angry, too damaged by what I'd seen in the war. I'd never studied governance, never prepared for leadership, never imagined I'd be anything other than a soldier following orders. His thumb stroked across my knuckles. But sometimes the people who think they're unqualified are exactly the ones who should lead, because they understand what's at stake. They remember what it's like to be vulnerable. Your father, I said carefully. The rumors about his death are true. His jaw tightened. He was a tyrant who used his position to terrorize anyone weaker than himself. He killed my mother when I was 15 because she dared to question one of his decisions. When I came back from the war and saw that nothing had changed, that he was still ruling through fear and cruelty, I challenged him to single combat for the throne. It's an old law, rarely invoked, but legal. He lost. You killed him. I gave him a choice: yield the throne and live out his days in exile, or fight to the death. His eyes met mine. He chose to fight. I didn't enjoy it, Ember, didn't celebrate or feel victorious. But I've never regretted it either, because every day he's not on the throne is a day someone vulnerable isn't suffering under his rule. I understood then why he'd been so quick to protect me, why he'd been willing to fight the council, rather than let them bully me into submission. He knew what it was like to be powerless, to watch cruelty unfold and be unable to stop it. The bond hadn't just connected us romantically. It had connected two people who understood, on a fundamental level, what it meant to fight for those who couldn't fight for themselves. I'm scared, I admitted. Of failing. Of letting you down. Of proving everyone right who said I wasn't qualified for this. Then we'll be scared together. He pulled me close, and I felt the steady beat of his heart against my cheek. But we'll also be strong together, brave together, better together than we ever could have been apart. That's what the mate bond means, Ember. Not that you have to be perfect, but that you don't have to face your imperfections alone. The coronation began at dawn, as tradition dictated. Helena and her assistants had been working since before first light, arranging my hair in an elaborate style woven with silver ribbons, helping me into the white gown, draping the ceremonial cloak around my shoulders. When I looked in the mirror, I barely recognized myself. This elegant, composed woman who looked like she might actually belong in a palace, might actually be capable of wearing a crown. The Grand Cathedral was packed with nobility from across the kingdom and beyond, their faces a sea of curiosity and judgment and, in a few cases, genuine warmth. I processed down the aisle with my head high, remembering everything Helena had taught me about posture and grace, feeling the weight of thousands of gazes tracking my movement. Damon waited at the altar, already crowned, dressed in formal black that made him look every inch the warrior king he was. When our eyes met, I felt the bond surge, a wave of love and pride and fierce determination that steadied my steps and strengthened my spine. The high priestess conducted the ceremony with ancient words that bound me not just to Damon, but to the kingdom itself, vows of service, of protection, of sacrifice. When she lifted the crown, delicate silver worked into shapes that resembled flowering branches. I knelt and felt its weight settle onto my head. "Rise, Queen Ember," she intoned. "Protector of the realm, voice of the voiceless, mate to the king and mother to the future." I stood, turned to face the assembled crowd, and let them see me. Not as a servant who'd gotten impossibly lucky, not as an obstacle to their plans, but as their queen. Chosen by the moon goddess herself, tempered by hardship, made strong through struggle. The applause was not universal. Lord Brennan and his faction remained seated, their expressions stony. But enough hands came together, enough voices raised in approval, that I felt something shift. Acceptance, maybe, or at least acknowledgement that this was happening whether they liked it or not. The celebration that followed was a blur of introductions and formal dances and carefully worded congratulations that sometimes felt more like warnings. But through it all, Damon remained at my side, dancing with me during the formal waltzes, his hand at my back during political conversations, his presence a constant reminder that I wasn't facing this alone. Late in the evening, as the celebration finally wound down, he pulled me onto a balcony overlooking the city. The lights of the capital spread out below us like earthbound stars, and somewhere down there, people who'd once worked beside me were sleeping in their cramped quarters, dreaming their own dreams of different futures. "What are you thinking?" Damon asked, wrapping his arms around me from behind. "That I want to do something with this position. Not just wear pretty gowns and host parties, but actually change things. Improve conditions for servants, make sure the soldiers have adequate supplies, reform the tax system so it doesn't crush the people it's supposed to serve." I leaned back against his chest. "Is that naive? Too idealistic? It's perfect." He pressed a kiss to my temple, "And we'll do it together. Starting tomorrow, you and I are going to turn this kingdom into something neither of us could have built alone." "Tomorrow," I agreed, "but tonight?" "Tonight, you're just Ember, and I'm just Damon, and we're two people who found each other against all odds and refused to let anything keep us apart." He turned me in his arms and kissed me properly. Not the careful public kisses we'd shared during the ceremony, but something deep and real and full of promise. When we finally broke apart, I was breathless and dizzy, and more certain than I'd ever been that this was right. This unlikely, impossible, perfectly imperfect match that the moon goddess had seen fit to create. 3 months later, I stood in the council chambers, no longer as a terrified girl defending her right to exist, but as a queen, presenting her first major policy initiative. The Servant Reform Act I'd drafted with Lord Ashford's surprisingly genuine help would provide better wages, safer working conditions, and paths for advancement based on merit rather than birth. Lord Brennan argued against it, of course, but his support had eroded significantly. The council approved the measure by a wide margin. Helena cried when I told her. So did Clara from the kitchens, and old Marcus, and dozens of others who'd never imagined their lives might improve, might matter to the people making decisions in the palace's upper floors. That night, Damon found me in the gardens, the same gardens where I'd said goodbye to Thomas, and the simple future I'd once imagined. I was standing beneath the cherry tree, its flowers long since faded, but new leaves green and promising overhead. "You did well today," he said, joining me on the bench. "The council members who still doubted you are running out of reasons to object. Even Brennan is starting to look like a relic clinging to an outdated past." Good. I laced my fingers through his, because I have about 17 more reforms I want to propose over the next year, and I'm going to need them reasonably cooperative. He laughed, a genuine full sound that I'd learned to coax from him more and more frequently. "Of course you do. I should have known that once you got started, you'd be unstoppable. You're the one who told me not to shrink." I looked up at him, this man who'd been a stranger mere months ago, and was now the other half of my soul. "You're the one who saw something in a servant girl cleaning your chambers and decided she was worth fighting for." Best decision I ever made. He pulled me closer, and I felt the bond between us, no longer new and uncertain, but solid and unshakable, built on shared purpose and growing love, though I'm fairly certain you would have ended up remarkable whether the bond existed or not. You just needed someone to notice. Maybe he was right. Maybe I would have found my own path eventually, would have made something of myself through sheer determination and refusal to give up. But I was grateful I didn't have to find out. Grateful for the impossible morning when I'd walked into a chamber with a mop and bucket and walked out with a mate. Grateful for every hard lesson and political battle that had taught me how to stand beside him as an equal. Grateful for the chance to be more than invisible, to matter, to make a difference. "I love you," I said, the word still new enough to make my heart race, in case I haven't mentioned it recently. "You mentioned it this morning, actually, and last night, and during the council session when you thought no one was watching." His smile was tender, amused. "But I never get tired of hearing it." "I love you," I repeated, just to watch his expression soften. "My king, my mate, my impossible perfect match." "And I love you," he replied, pressing his forehead to mine in the gesture that had become our private ritual. "My queen, my light, my reminder that the best things in life are the ones we never see coming." Above us, the moon emerged from behind a cloud, bathing the gardens in silver light. The moon goddess watching over her children, perhaps. Satisfied that the bond she'd forged between a king and a maid had produced exactly what both of them needed. Not just love, but purpose. Not just partnership, but transformation. I was no longer the girl who scrubbed floors and tried to be invisible. I was Queen Ember, voice of the voiceless, protector of the vulnerable, mate to a king who taught me that strength came in many forms. And every day, I woke up determined to prove worthy of the impossible gift I'd been given. Not the crown or the title or even the mate bond, but the chance to matter, to make a difference, to transform pain and struggle into something that served a greater good. It was more than I'd ever dreamed possible when I'd knelt on those marble floors, scrubbing away at other people's messes. And it was exactly what I'd been meant for all along. The story of the servant girl who became queen spread through the kingdom, told and retold until it took on the quality of legend. But those of us who'd lived it knew the truth. It wasn't about luck or destiny or some fairy tale transformation. It was about two damaged people finding each other and choosing every single day to build something beautiful out of their shared scars. And in the end, that was the greatest love story of all.